Good evening, all. Today, I want to look at the a very important aspect of radiography. In fact, it is why we are into radiography. Of course, it is why you are into the field that you have chosen, because you actually want to diagnose pathologies. And for one to be able to diagnose pathologies, the image that eventually comes that's eventually displayed must have some aspects of quality. So that we are going to look at today. I want to look at the image quality today. Dr. Ginikama, can you be here now?
It's not very clear. I'm just training to hear. Maybe I'll leave and join again.
Maybe it might be the bandwidth. So want to look at
your volume if it is. Can check your volume, the volume of your.
Okay, she has gone out. When she comes again.
But it's very clear.
On the charts, when she comes on again, you would just have type something on it. Use the chat menu. You should increase the volume of our mic. So today, we want to look at the most important aspect of imaging, which is image quality. Just as we were about to start, power was interrupted. And of course, it is a good thing here because you can hear noise in the background. Noise is one of the things we are going to look at today. How does noise affect an image? But before then, we want to look at the aspects of the components of image quality. What are the components that actually determine whether an image that has been taken will be nice as a determining factor for saying maybe if this patient has been diagnosed correctly or not. So these are the components of image quality. The most important ones, we've got contrast. We're going to look at resolution, and I'm going to look at noise. All these three constitute the modicum of image quality. That is, how does contrast affect image quality? How do we look at resolution? And how does the noise add to degrade image quality? In contrast, we are actually looking at this contrast. We're actually looking at the contrast resolution. Why for this? This resolution, we are actually talking about the spatial resolution. So I have a slide that will guide us in our discourse today. So today, oh sorry, I've got to share it. And we see the
Yes, you can see it.
okay.
But it's not on PowerPoint yet.
Oh, sorry. Is it okay now?
Yes, sir, it's okay.
Okay.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. So I want to look at the image quality. These are some of the aspects of image quality that actually determine whether an image that has been acquired will give us all we need. We give the radiologist or whosoever is um, the doctor, the scientist, and so on and so forth, what he or she needs in the image. So these are the components of the image quality. Of course, the most important one, contrast, resolution, and noise, will actually tell us how qualitative an image is. Then, of course, we have some other aspects, artifacts that tend to degrade image, and also distortion in a way, like we saw in what's it called, the image intensifier, the pin cushion effect. Of course, we have the images we take, but they are very, very different from a normal photography. In photography, the major intent there is for aesthetics, how beautiful the image looks. It doesn't actually has anything to do with quality in terms of trying to see, maybe you have captured a particular leaf, a particular tree. We are not interested in whether the leaves have the venation in the leaf, whether it is what's it called, it is a parallel vein or all those nuances. We are not interested in that. But when it comes to medical images, the medical images are used for anatomical and functional information. That is anatomy. For anatomy, is there any abnormality there inside a particular tissue or so? What is the function of the tissue? For example, in MRI, we do functional MRI. We want to look at the functions of the brain. Is there any indication that there could be something like a stroke? So these are the things. If an image that we have taken don't have this information, then it's just as well as nonsense. What has happened there in terms of ionizing radiation is that the patient has received a lot of radiation dose, whereas in aspects in procedures that don't use ionizing radiation like MRI and ultrasound, the patient has just gone there just for tourism. So the quality of an medical image is determined by so many factors, but basically we're looking at the imaging method used, the equipment characteristics, and the imaging variables. For the imaging method, of course, this depends on both um, the the person acquiring the image might be the imaging scientist or radiographer, as the case may be. And in some cases, it might be the medical practitioner, the radiologist, and so on and so forth. For example, there are some imaging modalities that are actually real time. So it is best interpreted the by the radiologist, like ultrasound. So the imaging method that has been used has a lot to do in terms of the quality of the medical image. Then the equipment characteristics. We have so many characteristics based on equipment, like for fluoroscopy. If we have a change from an image intensifier to flat panels, then we are going to have changes. Of course, the imaging variables, they have got a lot to do. The transistors, if you are using transistors for ultrasound, what type of transistor are we using? Is it a curvilinear? Is it a linear? And so on and so forth. Is it intracavitary? If you want to look at the cavity. So they've got a lot to do. If you use the wrong transistor, a transistor that doesn't have the right frequency, then you might not be having the best from the image. Of course, and coils, for example, in MRI, they've got so much errors to play. Then the kilovolts, the energy of the exposure has got a lot to do about the imaging. The gain, of course, in ultrasound, we have so much to do with gain. And the time of echo, this has to do with MRI. when we get to that. So skill of the operator is a very, very, very important role also, which has got to do, which is also tied to the imaging method at some point. Then of course, and the viewing condition. What type of light are we using in viewing? The monitor we are using in viewing, what's the pixel value of the monitor? For example, one has snapped with a very, very powerful phone. You use a powerful phone, maybe one that has got maybe 164 megapixel to get a particular view of, to get a particular image. Then you are not using a very, very low quality phone to view it. Of course, the image will be degraded because of the phone we are using. So the viewing condition has got a lot to do also in terms of image quality. You might have a very, very wonderful image, but if you don't view it with the right monitor, with the right machine, with the right type of light, then you might as well have problems with the interpretation. You might not get the actual interpretation. Among these factors, you can also have the variability of the operator, I mean the viewer, maybe the radiologist. So many, you can have a radiologist view an image, and at the end of the day, you might have a false false negative and all this stuff when it comes to ROC, receiver operator characteristics, which we might not get up to that extent today. But these are among the factors that actually determine how a medical image quality will turn out to be. So we look at different imaging methods. For example, want to have a particular chest X-ray or whatever, you can use and look at this. This was done with a particular exposure parameter. This one was done with another exposure parameter. You see the differences. This one gives us clear-cut, contrast. This one has been so bloated. Likewise here, so this one is grainy. This one is this one has a good contrast. This one also has a good contrast in a way, but it is graining. The noise inside is in this image is so enhanced. Of course, this one was done with a kind of construction, interactive construction, which we'll continue to get into, especially when we move into CT. Then, of course, different equipment characteristics. We've seen so many probes, probes. We have linear, we have linear, and so on and so forth. Some of these things, they are tuned for a particular segment of the body, and also for particular depth. If you want to go deeper into the tissue, we use a particular frequency to acquire, to get to view the inner part of the body. And if you want to go shallow on the skin, there is also a kind of selection in terms of Bluetooth. Okay. I'm trying to ask a question. Okay. It was a mistake.
Enter off and play it.
Okay, you might need to mute. Not asking question. Okay. So we have various imaging. This is a 2D ultrasound. Get to that much later. Then we have different imaging variables. We have this captured with at a kV of 80, and this one 140. You see the subtle and differences in these two images. Very, very different. You can see this structure here, clearly seen with 140, but this one very, very hard to detect. Very, very hard. So it all depends. And then in between here and here, you can see the contrast here enhanced better here than the one here. So it all depends on what you want to view and so on and so forth. At times, we might need to tune down the kV to enhance contrast. But if contrast is the major thing we are looking at, then it might as well be a good option to tune down the kVp of the procedure. If not, we look if we want to consider the contrast, maybe the spatial resolution, then we might be looking at maybe using some other factors. Then we have this. We have a patient. We have so many parameters, which is open, so many options which the operator can look at. This might be KVP, this might be KV, MS, T, and so on and so forth. So he has so many things to choose based on the type of examination under under consideration. And of course, as the patient is imaged, this imaging system, we have so many things that the imaging system has also brought into play. It is, of course, trying to capture this image, the image of this object. But in doing that, it's going to introduce some artifacts, some log, and so on, some distortion as a result of the electronics of the system. Of course, we will get to that. When we get to noise, we begin to see some of this effect. So artifacts might be introduced. Of course, we will have log, then we will have contrast because of the attenuation, different attenuation properties of the structures. The attenuation has got to do with how the contrast is going to come out. Then noise, of course, noise must always be there. We have so many components of noise. We also look at. Then, of course, distortion might be as a result of imperfections in the system or just as a result of electronics of the system. At the end of the day, we are going to have an image. Then it now boils down to the interpreter, a radiologist, urologist, and as the case may be, to interpret the image. So the first thing we want to look at in this imaging chain that determines the quality of the image and quality of a particular procedure is the contrast. Well, this is as a result of difference in tissue characteristics between specific points. It is different for different modalities. The way tissue is formed for diagnostic radiography, ordinary radiography is different from the way contrast is formed in MRI. And different from that in ultrasound. In ultrasound, contrast is as a result of the impedance of tissue. Then for radiography, or conventional radiography is as a result of linear attenuations of the X-ray by different structures in the body. Then for MRI, there are a whole lot of things that we cause contrast. Of course, maybe as a result of a different tissue realization and a result of different tissue longitudinal regrowth. So these are the things that constitute contrast in MRI. So it is different for different imaging modalities. So results in a number of different steps during creation, image processing, and image and displaying. So contrast results from right from the time the image was created to the time it was processed. And during the stage of processing, most of the time, as you are creating your image, you have in the real time, almost immediately, you are processing the image. The computer system is processing the image. Then it is being displayed. At each point in time, we have a particular type of contrast under discussion that is going on. And we've got here a low contrast image, a medium contrast, low, high contrast, low contrast. Between they have a medium contrast image. At some point, you might just need this. You might just need them low contrast. You don't need, if it is not necessary, we have so much, we don't need them so much detail, which of course we get. So the three contributors to contrast, and the contrast here, of course, contrast resolution are the subject contrast, the detector contrast, This thing is a pointer. The detector contrast and the displayed contrast. In the subject and contrast, we are looking at some inherent factors that contribute to subject contrast. So we are looking at some exterior factors, some factors that are not as a result of the subject we are imaging. So those ones are external factors. They, one way or the other, enhance or degrade this contrast in which we eventually get. Then the detector and the film contrast. At times, this can be broken down into different, maybe film contrast and detector contrast. For imaging, for in radiography, of course, so we talk about the film contrast when we are looking at um, manual, what's it called, non-digital radiography. I think it's a conventional radiography that uses that the film is developed in the dark room or in conventional in sorry. Oh, sorry, I thought they restored them power. Because I don't like this noise coming. So we have the subject contrast, which is based on the contribution from the intrinsic factor, that's the subject itself, the body itself. Of course, in this case, the patient and every other thing that has got to interact with the X-ray or whatever, the reflected echo. I mean the echo in case of an ultrasound. So it's significant factors. Then I was talking about the detector stroke film contrast. If you're talking about digital radiography, then we are only talking about the detector contrast. But if you're talking about film, that is conventional radiography, we are looking at film contrast. Then we also have, and it's very, very important, the displayed image. What can contribute to the contrast of the display image? We have the image reconstruction. We have so many reconstruction canals, convolution canals, and so on, especially in digital radiography. So much used in CT, in MRI, in PETs, in ultrasound, in SPECT, and so on and so forth. This evidently bring about some form of contrast, but in most cases, they're trying to enhance the contrast. So these are the three major contributors of contrast in an image. I'm going to look at them the one after the other. Look at the subject contrast. We have this. We have a homogeneous incident X-ray beam. We have this. We have a particular, but assuming this is a patient, and inside that patient, we have a particular tissue here, which is of different, which has different attenuation coefficient, linear attenuation coefficient than this other part of the body. We also have a tissue here, which has a lesser attenuation coefficient based on its thickness. So when this one X-ray interacts with this body, it's going to be attenuated to an extent. When it interacts with this body, it's going to be a form of attenuation. Likewise, if it interacts with this body, it's going to be attenuated. So at the end of the day, we have to look at the profile of the X-ray after exiting the patient. We are going to see this after exiting the patient. So sorry. I'm sorry, just give me 2 minutes. Let me go and put up the jet. I think it's disturbing some people downstairs. Okay. Excuse me. Sorry. Sorry, just give me a few minutes. Today, I'll do something else. Just give me a few minutes. Ah. Hello. I'm sorry for the interruption. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Can hear you, sir.
Okay. Please, I'm sorry for the interruption.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
I'm so sorry for the interruption. We are looking forward to the day where we'll have very quality power in this nation. It's all about this time around, that's power quality. So let me continue with the screen I was sharing. So I said this is the profile after the X-ray has interacted with the body. This is the height of the image in terms of a X-ray profile. Now after it has interacted, this is the height to which the X-ray coming out of the patient will look like. So here we have a reduced height because the X-ray along this part interacted with the tissue and so many X-ray photons were absorbed. So we have lesser here. Here, of course, the level from here to here will all be different. I mean, will all be the same. Look at the level here, from here to here the same, from here to here the same, because they pass through the same material, a material of the same attenuation coefficient. So the height of the profile will be the same for this section of the body, this section, and the section. Whereas this other section that didn't interact with the body here, and from here to here, they will have the same profile, the same height. So if we want to look at the contrasts of this object, the contrast as a result of the attenuation of this body by, of course, different structures. It is simply C is A minus B all over A. A is just a way of telling us that the number of particles or the number of photons arriving, exiting the patient at a different point in time. This time we are looking at A, assuming this one is A and this is B. The contrast between A and B is simply A minus B all over A. So that will give us a contrast. In this case, A is greater than this pointer. A is greater than B. If B had been greater than A, it would have been B minus A all over B. In that case, we still have the same value, the same positive value. Assuming we have an A to be this and a B to be this. Okay, let me quickly share this on the screen. I mean, on the board here. Okay. Let me stop the share and then press this board for a moment. I have a particular body here. Convex ray, all passing through this body. I have A, I have B. I want to look at the contrast. A minus B all over A. And A is simply the difference between this and this is just Z. So at the end of the day, whatever we got, we're looking at the profile here. We're not interested in these other ones. We're just interested in these two structures. The profile at the end of the day is as a result, the contrast will be just because of this height here. So that will give us the contrast in this image. If you're looking at this structure and this structure, the contrast between the two of them is basically because of this height. If all of them had been, if these two structures had been the same height, at the end of the day, we just have a contrast of this nature. There wouldn't be, the contrast and difference will just be zero because A minus B, A and B will be the same thing. At the end of the day, we have the contrast will just be zero. So a way of calculating the contrast is looking at the number of photons exiting these points. The number of photons exiting this as a result of this, this X. So we have, is this? Now this A is N not E. N for A, and so N for A is as a result of we have N not the photon interacting with the body, the initial amount, all over multiplied by this exponential function. And for B, we have it to be N not E minus because of this component. This for okay, this for A. This is for B. Because of this component, because of this height, Z. So we are going to have an increase in attenuation as a result of this Z. There will be more attenuation because of the difference here. So at the end of the day, we have this, assuming this is A, this is A, and this is our B. So the contrast, this is not, of course, I don't think you'll be tested on deriving this formula and so on and so forth. But it is good for us to know because image quality, we actually have so many mathematics to deal with. But of course, you've been required to do all this. So at the end of the day, you have our contrast will now be N not E minus mu X minus E. We have this. Not be contrast will not be N not E minus mu X minus N not E X plus Z all over A, which is N not E minus mu X. I don't want to bother you so much with this, but at the end of the day, we are going to have, we all did all these indices in school then. So we have C will just simply be N naught minus UX into bracket. Let me just complete it. And not E minus this minus, I'm going to have this N not E minus mu x multiplied by N not E minus Z mu Z all over N not E minus mu x. So don't bother yourself with this. So at the end of the day, have this is a constant here. This is a factor here. So 1 minus N naught E, but this is Z minus mu Z all over N naught E minus don't bother yourself with this. At the end of the day, this is going to cancel out. We now have our contrast to be 1 minus we're going to cancel out. At the end of the day, we have our contrast to be 1 minus N naught E minus mu Z. So, sorry. A contrast is basically determined by the difference in the thickness of the material. So if you have a greater amount of thickness, there's a difference in thickness. If you have a greater amount of thickness differences between the two structures, the contrast is going to be enhanced. Like in the something we looked at, the greater the difference in this thickness, that's Z. Let's look at this. The greater in this thickness, the much more contrast we are going to have. So that gives us a clue to one of the inherent factors that contribute to contrast of the body. Of course, this is just a very, very basic explanation. There are so many things we have got to look here, not just thickness. Of course, if we are looking at the intensity of the material, the density of the materials have a very, very significant role to play, which of course is a way of telling us how thick a material is. So okay, sorry. Let me continue with the share again. Let me continue with the screen. So we have that. So at the end of the day, we have a contrast being 1 minus E mu raised to power Z. So as the thickness increases, there also the contrast is going to increase. The contrast is going to increase. So if Z is larger or mu is larger, C is going to be higher. Of course, this is the attenuation coefficient. If the attenuation coefficient differential among tissues are very, very, is very, very large, we are going to have very much enhanced contrast. So look at then also we've got to talk about the KV. If X-rays of a low KV are used, we are going to have much more contrast. How do we actually explain this? We might be asking an examination, of course, low KVP leads to higher contrast. Could you explain how that has got to do? How does that introduce a higher contrast in an image when one reduces the KV? It is such that when we now use lower KVP, lower KV, then we are dealing with a lower energetic X-ray beam. When that happens, it means that they are going to undergo much more attenuation. They're going to undergo much more attenuation than when we use higher KVP. And in doing that, it now means that because so many of the higher, whatever, since we are using low KVP, it means it is a low energetic X-ray beams we are using. And because of that, they are going to undergo higher attenuation. So because they are undergoing higher attenuation, the differences in the two of them will now be enhanced. It will be different when you use higher KVP. Because if you use higher KVP, of course there will be attenuation, but the number of X-ray photons that will be attenuated, I think the difference in the X-ray photons that will be attenuated as a result of the passage through here and through here wouldn't be that much as when you use low KDP. So when we use low KDP, we are actually enhancing the contrast in the sense that we are going to have so many more lower energetic X-ray being attenuated. So in that case, we are going to have higher contrast. So this is one way in which we, of course, increase the contrast in a body by using a lower KVP. Now we look at we have looked at so we want to look at the intrinsic factors. Of this as a result of the actual anatomical or functional changes in the patient's tissue. These are the major things that give rise to the primary contrast. Of course, every other contrast is a secondary. These factors give rise to the primary contrast that we, of course, the system is going to work on. Whether we are looking at the system performance in terms of increasing the contrast, it is because of the subject contrast. This intrinsic contrast. If there is no contrast due to these intrinsic factors, then whatever the system is going to do to that object is zero, assuming you have zero contrast. If you multiply zero by anything, you're still going to have zero. So whatever the convolution we are using, whatever the kernel we are applying, whatever the iterative reconstruction we are going to do to that image, at the end of the day, we are going to have zero, because all those reconstructions or convolutions, as the case may be, they're actually multiplicative. So if you multiply zero to anything. So this is the major one that we have got to look at. So for physiologic anatomical structures, assuming you have a patient, we look at these two diagrams, two images. And of course, this should be CT in a way. If you look at, you have a particular structure, you have a particular part of the body in which you want to image. Of course, as a result of the different attenuation of that structure, you are going to have a contrast in terms of anatomical contrast. Now, if it is a functional change, for example, in MRI, we want to look at a particular section of the brain. Maybe it is a ischemic or what is it? We want to look at the way blood, water diffuses in and out of that particular body. If we now know the rate at which water diffuses for a non-diseased brain, then whenever we see a difference, we now use MRI to image a particular brain, and the rate at which water diffuses is different, which will be displayed in the what's it called, the MRI, the fMRI, that's diffusion MRI. Then you will know that there is a problem with that. This is going to introduce a functional contrast as a result of that. So, of course, this has got to do with the physiologic properties of the system. So that is going to introduce an intrinsic contrast because of the patient that we are imaging. Then the exotic factors, they are the optimization of image acquisition protocols, and of course enhancements that come to play. I'm sorry. So we have, for example, we also have some contrast enhancing agent. For example, you might want to use some gadolinium contrast in MRI. In CT, you might want to use one form of contrast or the other. In PET, in SPECT, at the same thing. So all these are done just to enhance the extrinsic contrast that has already been created because of the different anatomy, the different physiologic function of that body. So it's going to enhance the contrast. And again, another way of enhancing the subject contrast in terms of the extrinsic factor is what we have seen before, changing the X-ray energy. If you change the X-ray energy, maybe changing it from 60 to 70 and then to 80. Of course, we are going to see some differences. Then when we begin to change the MAS, can also lead to some subtle changes in a contrast. These are all examples of changes as a result of the extrinsic factors. So we have, of course, when we get to MRI, we begin to look at all these things, echo time, using short echo time and long echo times. What will that result? Will it result in an image that has a very good quality or not? We're also going to look at the use of a short repetition time and the longer repetition time. How would that affect the image of the MRI? So all in all, these parameters which are um, extrinsic all the time will lead to different subject contrast. Now look at the detector, so film and contrast. We have some film which have a very high speed film. Are going to lead to very good contrast, and low ones, maybe 400 like this one. We have a 400 speed film. It's going to be different from when we use 200 as a film speed and film. These are going to enhance. These are going to cause some changes in the contrast of the object. Like when we were doing what's it called, conventional radiography, we looked at the shift in the characteristic of left, right. It's as a result of a different contrast. If we want to improve the contrast, this has got to shift them backwards. If we draw another characteristic curve for a film that has a bigger contrast, it is going to, the shape is going to come this way. So these are all going to, detector contrast is as a result of a different film. Different film might introduce different, a kind of enhanced contrast. We are using a particular, apart from, we can even have the same type of film speed. We might have the way the grains have been formed inside the film will also lead to differences in contrast. Most times these differences are subtle, but at times they might be so enhanced that we will need to discover that during a quality assurance and test. Then detector, like we said before, is as a result of using, of course, a digital device in acquiring a particular image. And because of that, you're going to have the detector contrast. I will look at this characteristic curve. Of course, we know that this is an area of overexposure, which we don't need. Don't use this area. And this underexposure, if we have any image along this region, this low KVP region, we are not going to have any image. I mean, we have an image, but then the image will be useless for diagnostic purposes. So it is only in this region, this linear region, that we make use of in interpreting our image. Anything below here and then beyond, where are you? Anything below here and then beyond here is useless for. So this is for correctly exposed body. If you look at this beyond here, overexposed, and then around this area, underexposed, here, and so on and so on, underexposed. So this can also constitute a form of contrast. If you have the correctly exposed here, if you move up a little bit, of course, you have another type of a contrast as a result of shift. As a result of shift, sorry, as a result of this a shift. So they all have their roles to play in this contrast. So we look at this. We look at the still detector film. We have 2 MAS, 6 MAS, and 24 MAS. Now this is basically not because of the detector film. This is as a result of the exposure parameter. We look at this. This is a correct exposure, underexposure, and of course overexposure. We don't. We have so much contrast here, which at the end of the day means nothing. So, but this, at the end of the day, is going to give us the best exposure parameter. It's going to give us the best diagnosis. We can see whatever we want to see here. So we have then the last of the contrast we are going to look at is the displayed contrast. This is meant, of course, for viewing. Many images have been depending from 10, 12, 14, and so on and so forth. As a result of that, the bit depth, which is in terms of shades of gray, we actually bring about contrast differences. The larger the number of bits we use for acquiring that image, the better will that image be. For example, in this one we use 1024 shades of gray. If you use 10 bits, what if you now use something like 2 bits? If you use 2 bits, the number of shades of gray we are going to have is 4. If you use 3 bits, we are going to have 8. That's 2 raised to power 3. If you use 10, it's going to give us 1024. So the number of shades of gray we use will actually give us a very, very big latitude, such that we will now have so much contrast. We can have shades of gray, which is actually the contrast we are talking about. Of course, we have modern displays that are capable of 8 bits to 10 bits. Most times we use 502 to 1000, so on. Mainly 10 to 12 bits. 8 to 12 bits. Then display computer needs to convert the higher bit depth, that data encoded on them to the spectrum of grayscale on the monitor. Like we said before, we have to use the monitor with the right with the right resolution. If you use a monitor with a lesser resolution, we are actually defeating the purpose for which we have acquired the image. So the monitor has to be the one with very, very high resolution. Of course, that is why very, very high quality monitors are used in the PACS room, in the reporting room, and so on and so forth. Very, very high quality. So we are going to look at windowing, leveling and the windowing. It's also another way of enhancing contrast. Assuming we want to look at the differences in maybe two structures that maybe want to look at the differences in the two structures. We have so many structures, but we want to look at the differences in two structures. All we need to do is to look at the contrast, maybe the attenuation coefficient of those two structures, and based on that, we get a window. We have a windows in between. We base on the attenuation coefficient, attenuation properties of those two, and then tune a window. At the end of the day, all other factors, all other organs, all other structures which are not a part of, which don't fall into that window will be displayed as black or white, as the case may be. Then we can now use, we now have enhanced contrast in the structures we want to look at. So this is used a lot in CT, MRI, a lot. We use windowing and the leveling to enhance contrast between the structures. We want to look at the kind of a window. This one has been set. This one has set with a hand speed unit of 600. That's the level. Why the window was set at 1600. If you now change it to a window of 40 hand speed unit and a 350, we are looking at something different. Some other structures we just turn white or black. Then look at this window of hand speed unit of 300. We get to know more of this when we enter our next major topic, which is CT. Then we, at the second aspect of imaging, image quality we have to look at is spatial resolution. Spatial resolution. In contrast and resolution, we are looking at adjacent bodies having different attenuation coefficients, having different, not just attenuation, having different ability to interact with whatever imaging modality we are using. You see the sound wave, the ability of that and those bodies to differentially interact with um, the the rays, the sound waves. If it's an MRI, the differential ability of the different structures to relax. If it is in conventional radio, whatever radiography, it's just the way in which the different structures attenuate and the X-ray beam. That gives us a contrast resolution. But in spatial resolution, we are looking at the ability of the imaging modality to differentiate two objects. We have two objects close by. Maybe it could be in the same tissue, and they are just close by. How do we differentiate them? How do we know that this object is different from this object? There are two objects. How do we do that? That has to be done with this topic and spatial resolution. You can see this fruits are captured, so on and so forth. So for film mammograph, we have so many resolution. We have different resolution for different modality. But the screen film mammography is about the best resolution. In fact, all screen film radiography, they have the best and spatial resolution. Then followed by the digital modalities. So we're talking about spatial resolution. Films have excellent resolution. These are just a screen film. Then if you talk about using only film, if we had a film here, film would have been the best. But if you combine film with screen, the resolution, the spatial resolution reduces to an extent. But there's a reason why we do this. So we have a digital mammography. The resolution is further reduced from 0.5 to 0.1. I mean 0.05. Therefore, screen film radiography, you have it here, 0.08. Very, very wonderful resolution. So this one can resolve an object as small as 0.03. But if you take that, if you take this object 0.03 and I use maybe digital radiography, you wouldn't see it. It will just it won't be resolved at all. One wouldn't be able to detect that, and there is a structure which is at 0.03. So this is the limiting resolution, the limiting spatial resolution of this system. The worst ones are those that are used in nuclear medicine. The PET, the ordinary nuclear medicine, that's ordinary gamma camera, and of course, the spectrum camera. So we have two mammograms of from digital machine and then from film. So in looking at the spatial resolution, there are so many domains, so many points, so many addendum, or how can we say it, that we need to look at. One of those domains, one of those special features that we have to look at is the point and spread function. It is one of the way we want to describe the ability of an object to give us maybe an inkling, a kind of an understanding of spatial resolution. If we can look at, if we can get the point spread function of an object, we can say this one has a better resolution than one other one. So this is the most basic measure of resolution property of an imaging system, point spread. If you want to have a point spread function, all you need to do is maybe on a radiography machine, on the X-ray tube, you cover the X-ray tube with a lead strip. You cover it with a lead strip and then just drill a very, very small hole. At this point, we drill a very, very small hole such that the X-ray photons will just come up from this point. Then we now make it interact with the system. Interacts with the system. At the end of the day, we are going to have a function like this. I'm going to have a function like this after interacting with the system. So this function, this the interaction of this X-ray quantum with a system is going to bring about blurring. And the amount of blurring that is brought about will tell us the spatial resolution of that object. If you have much more blurring, it means it doesn't have a very good spatial resolution. But if it has less blurring, we can say that it has a very good spatial resolution. I think we will appreciate that as we move further. So we have for point spread function, it could be symmetric or non-symmetric. In symmetric, we're talking about an isotropic response. That is, every pixel in the image has been affected. Okay, this is just a pixel, but we have a many pixel here. They have been affected equally by the point source. But if you look at this is kind of skewed towards the left. So this is as a result of an asymmetric response. That is a non-isotropic response to this point source. There is no need moving into further mathematical disturbance of so many mathematical model of this function. It is just good at this point for us to know that in fact, almost all the imaging system, they fall in between these two. There is no perfect symmetric response of an imaging system to any particular stimulus from a machine. It is always in between these two. So we have, of course, at the end of the day, if a particular system responds equally to point source, that is irrespective of the area in which we want to make sure the point spread function. Spread function. At the end of the day, if we have them to be isotropic at each point in time, or symmetric, then we are talking about a stationary system. We are talking about stationary system. If they are different, if you measure at this point, we have a different stuff. At this point, I have a different. In fact, if we have at least 2 points in which there are subtle or enhanced differences, then we are looking at a non-stationary imaging system. So we look at, so we also look at line and spread function and edge and spread function. The line spread function, this is a point spread function. We are looking at a line of maybe input signal. Maybe like in the case of CT machine, because CT uses a fan of X-ray to image the body. But ordinary radiography uses so many of these points, not just one, so many of these points and spread out along the body. But for CT, especially the generation of CT we have now, it uses a fan beam. And the fan beam can best be described as a line of a beam interacting in various sections of the body. Then an edge spread function is when one is, of course, approaching most especially the edges of objects. These two wouldn't be enough to describe that, interaction completely. So at the end of the day, we have to describe it in terms of an edge and spread function. These are just function, mathematical function, mathematical models that help us tell us so much about spatial resolution. So, for example, like we did in radiography. Radiography uses two screens, whereas mammography uses one screen. A screen film with two phosphors. This one uses just one phosphor. You can look because of interaction of this. This one will traverse so much a distance, and it's, as this traversing, you're going to have spread of the light rays that will come out. I mean, X-ray interacting with this phosphor is going to give light. As so as the light travels down before hitting the emulsion, it is going to disperse. Be dispersing, you're going to have a lateral dispersion. By the end of the day, this is the profile of the point spread function. So we have it. This for thin screen. Then for thin screen, we have a very small PSF. I mean a PSF with a small width. So this has a better spatial resolution than this. So this is one of the ways we can use a PSF to explain the spatial resolution of an object that has, an imaging system that has a small width as is an PSF. A PSF of a small width has better spatial resolution than a detector system that has a PSF of big width. That also applies to line spread function and the X spread function. If their width have if their widths are big, then they don't have a very good spatial resolution. But if they have a thin width, then you can say they have a very wonderful spatial resolution. So this is also this was what I was talking about before. We have a fan of beam, a line of beam. So we use it blah, blah, blah. This gives rise to a PFA. A PFS LSF, line spread function, tomography. Then we have an important topic that we would have loved not to treat, convolution, but for the benefit of the syllabus, we just need to look at it briefly. Of course, and not as engineers or medical physicists or the likes, who deal with so many of these, especially the engineers that do the physical, the hardware. Then of course, the scientists, whatever, that deal with production of the software that we use in all of this mathematical software. But of course, as radiologists, we also need to know what the things that are happening inside the system, and the convolution is an example of that. In fact, is all there is to do in an imaging system, especially digital imaging system. There is one form of convolution or the other. A convolution is just a mathematical model that tells us about what is happening in the system in terms of blurring, which also has an inkling, has something to say about the spatial resolution. You have a function h, input and signal. If we deal with it with a particular multiplicative factor, which is called a convolution kernel, we are going to give rise to another function, g of x, g, which is a function of x. X can be any type of variable. It can be a variable that is dependent on a position. It can be a variable that is dependent on a frequency. When the variable depends on frequency, then we're looking at a modulation transfer function, MTF. But we don't need to go into all those. This is just what happens inside the system. So mathematical software, mathematical algorithms that have been developed by programmers. And of course, like I said before, one of the people that is imaging scientists are actually computer scientists. We have so many, of course, and so many people that are involved in this. So they have developed all this. We look at this, multiplying this and kernel with this first row of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you want to acquire the next one, you move down a little bit, you multiply the next one, and so on. We have just looked at C3 faces. We can continue with this 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Continue with all the 9 faces, and at the end of the day, we have G. G, that is the product. Not the product anyway. What's it called? The the output. Okay, output. That should be the better word to use. The output. This is the input multiplied by a form of a multiplicative factor. Of course, this one is just in its simplest case. Of course, this multiplied by this is not equal to this. This factor, this multiplication is a kind of operation, which is not just a multiplication. So at the end of the day, we have this. So if we want to plot this on a diagram, we plot the h of x on a diagram. Let me go back. You look at all this, we plot 42 point this on the graph, 36 point this, the fourth one this, second, 7, 8, 9, and so on. We plot them on a piece of paper. We also plot and these ones we have gotten on a piece of paper, side by side on the same graph sheet. We're going to have this. So this is a g of x. G of x, the exposure, I mean the output, and this is the inputs we have plotted. So what this tells us is this one has so much variation. This h of x has so much variation. But when we have multiplied it with a particular kernel, convolution kernel, we are going to have this. What this tells us is this has been smoothened. So one of the requirements of a convolution kernel is just to smoothen a particular input, whatever we have. Of course, we do this in all imaging modalities like the CT. In CT, when one says it's using a soft filter, it's talking about something, using maybe bone filter, talking about something. Those filters are actually convolution material which applies a convolution kernel to a particular input and data that is coming into the machine. Of course, after the X-ray has interacted with the patient. So this is so we have a 2D image of the body, and we applied application has been made to the stuff. At the end of the day, we have these various diagram. I mean, these various images. The images here we have this is the original image. After a particular convolution kernel was applied, we had this, and this the second, third, and fourth. You could see the increasing edge enhancement. You could see this one very kind of clear in a way, almost the same thing as this. But the kernel we have applied here made this image blurred. This one is more blurry than this, but you can see this very, very sharp image. So we have some amount of noise here, but it's very, very sharp. You can see the edges clearly seen here. A clear demarcation of the edges here. So the convolution kernels can actually add beauty to our image, our imaging in terms of quality. You can see that. So that is one of the functions of course, that is a major function to bring out more out of the image, no matter the input, what has gone into the machine after interacting with the detectors. But the machine can actually do so much with the image to bring about a very, very fine resolution in terms of a spatial and contrast resolution. Now, another way of describing spatial resolution is by looking at the frequency domain. The frequency domain. That is, we have f, which is the frequency domain, being equal to 1/2 delta. Delta here, we are talking about the detector now. That is, we are talking about the machine, and we are talking about the machine. Our area of interest is the detector of the machine. The alpha here, what's it called? The delta here is the detector pitch. I mean the detector width or whatever. It determines the frequency domain. So we look at two graphs here. And this one is actually an analog from an analog system, and this one is from a digital system. A digital system makes as much use as possible of square waves, whereas an analog system, of course, cannot but make use of sine wave. So boundary two can actually, we could actually use this frequency domain in explaining that this one is circles per millimeter, and this one is line pairs per millimeter. They all have a way of telling us the spatial resolution. So frequency domain is one way. We did look at this. When we look at, we did see this maybe last, we've been seeing this a couple of times when we plotted modulation transfer function against a spatial frequency. Because this is a spatial frequency we are talking about. At the end of the day, we are going to have this frequency as a frequency domain. So we, well, this is the convolution kernel we talked about the other time. G of x is actually an integral of maybe minus infinity to positive infinity, as the case may be. So we're not interested in all this. Sorry. So look at the modulation transfer function. This is not there. So it is a way of looking at the spatial frequency response of a system, which has got to do with, of course, the spatial resolution. How does the system respond to various object size? How does the system respond? If you have a two system, you want to acquire a particular image. Of course, you want to image a particular object. Maybe the object has in the object you have a spacing, very minute spacings. The system that makes up the body. How am I going to put it? Let's say you have okay, you have maybe a developing cancer in a breast tissue, very small. If you use one imaging system, you might not get it. But if you use another one, you might get it. But this is just as a result of the different spatial frequency response of those systems. The one that has a very wonderful spatial resolution, we detect that, and it is tied to the frequency domain, which we want to look at. More MTF, like we've been using, is actually a frequency response of. It's a way of calculating. It's actually the Fourier transform. It's actually the Fourier transform. And when we are talking about the Fourier transform, we are looking at the frequency variation, which we would not go into. We don't need all those mathematical whatever. So this is measured in line pairs per millimeter. Of course, for all systems, at the end of the day, if we measure the line pair per millimeter, it will give us an idea of what that particular system can resolve. Like in the last lecture, we looked at the limiting spatial frequency, which will give us the least thickness or the least width of the object it can measure. So it is limited by the Nyquist frequency, the Nyquist limit. There's a limit to which a body, a detector can measure. The Nyquist limit is the frequency, the smallest frequency. The frequency that a particular incoming signal mustn't exceed. If an incoming signal exceeds a particular frequency, then it will be impossible for that system to actually give a very accurate description, accurate determination of what's of course there will be some mistake. Not so wouldn't I use a mistake? There wouldn't be a perfect match of frequency. Sorry, I was going back. The frequency. What's it called? The frequency response. That is, if you are using a much more frequency, let's say a system has a limiting frequency maybe of 5 times cycles per millimeter, and you are now introducing an input that has 7 cycles per millimeter. It is not going to resolve it correctly. What it will have is that there's no way it will reach the peak frequency. Whatever frequency that object, that detector will now measure will be lesser than its own frequency. At least it uses F5. I think we have some diagram that will explain that better. We look at this MTF. This is a graph we are very, very familiar with. The MTF, which is actually a frequency modulated factor, MTF, modulation transfer frequency, which we don't need to go into details. It's just a way of, we have a signal, we now calculate the frequency response. At the end of the day, we modulate it, we normalize it to 100%, to 1. That is the best a perfect system can have. A perfect system has an MTF of 1, after which is not possible. So as we now have, as the spatial frequency increases to cycles per millimeter, the MTF continues to reduce. At a point in time, where we have 10% of MTF, we're going to have a limiting spatial resolution. This system generally I'm taking. It mustn't get to 0. Like in the last one, we assume it's when the stuff went to 0. But this graph will almost not tend to 0. It will continue almost indefinitely. This now becomes asymptotic to this same x-axis. So for, sorry, this graph is not, sorry. This was not correctly placed. This 0.1 should be here. So this should come down a little bit. This 100, this one is around here, while this 0.0 is here. This 0.1 is here. I think something wasn't, when we did the conversion of, it was actually, I think, a PDF. It was converted to PPT. So during the conversion, we now have a mismatch of the value against the graph. So when you have the MTF just about 10%, that is the limiting spatial resolution. So at the end of the day, if you have, we now look at this frequency domain. If you have the limiting frequency as this particular number being equal to 1/2 delta, where delta is the detector pitch, we can calculate the resolution, the smallest object that detector can resolve. So for example, in this case, we have this to be 1.6 millimeter. So here's this pointer. We have this to be 1.6 millimeter. We can actually calculate the smallest object it can resolve. Let me stop this and maybe quickly look at a whiteboard. Let me stop this at 1.6. 1.6, okay. 1.6 millimeter. What did this get? Sorry. 1.6. Sorry. Let me go back to the board and look at. Sorry, I did not do that. Okay, 1.6 cycles per millimeter. 1.6 cycles per millimeter. Okay, 1.6 cycles per millimeter. There we go. So this corresponds to, that's the limiting, 10%, that's 0.1. Like I said, it was 0.0, this is a 1.0. It gave us a 1.6 for a particular detector system. So that is the limiting spatial and frequency. These are spatial and frequency. This is in cycles per millimeter, which could also be line pairs per millimeter for a digital system to be LP per millimeter. So 1.6 cycles per millimeter is the whatever the limiting spatial frequency. So we can get this one gives us the least, the smallest object it can resolve. So if you have the spatial frequency given as 1/2, this we now have F is a 1.6 circles per millimeter being 1/2 delta. At the end of the day, have a 2 delta to be 1/1.6. 1/1.6, which is 10^16. 10^16. So we have 5, we have 8. So we have 8, 0, 8 times 6, 48, 20. So around the 0.2 millimeters. So the smallest object it can resolve is around 0.62 millimeter. If that object is lower than this, has a width lower than this, we wouldn't be able to see it again. So that is the limit of its spatial resolution. So different systems, different different detectors. Wow, Jesus Christ. Okay, we can continue with. We don't necessarily need the board again. So for this particular system, it is a 1.6, the limiting as 10% of the MTF. So it's still the same thing with a line pairs per millimeter. We use also the same analogy in explaining that. So we have two detectors A and B. And this detector, this object, after passing through this detector, interacted with it and gave out a PSF of this structure of this output, and this one gave a PFS of point spread function of this. Of course, we could see the blurring in this one is greater than the blurring in this one. So A is a better detector, a better system than B. So how what causes that blurring to be so evident in one? What are the things that can cause a particular system to have a particular much more blurring than another system? One of one of the many criteria that we have to look at is what we call the Nyquist criterion. If the frequency of a particular signal, an incoming signal, an input signal, is greater than the frequency of the measured signal, then we are going to have what we call aliasing. We're going to have aliasing, principle of aliasing, which we are going to, we have a particular signal. If you look at this signal, this input signal, it has this is one cycle. From here to here. So this gives us one particular cycle. From here to here is a cycle. From here to here is a cycle. From wave, we know that crest, the distance between two crests or the distance between two troughs gives us a wavelength. So this, but for this one has a lower, which is this measured signal. It has a lower frequency. That is, it covers a lesser number of cycles per second. For this one, covers much more number of cycles per second. So there's a limit to the frequency that we can measure based on this Nyquist frequency. The Nyquist frequency, which is 1/2, of course, places a limit on the frequency we can measure, of the frequency of a signal we will measure. How do I mean? I mean that a detector with looking at a detector with a Nyquist frequency of 5 cycles per second, at least, sorry. Oh, sorry. A detector with a Nyquist frequency of 5 cycles per second has this frequency, 5 cycles, 5 cycles per millimeter. But in the first one, we have so many input and signal. So many input and signal. In this first one, the input signal was 2. The input signal was 2. It is lesser than the Nyquist frequency of that system. So the input signal is going to be correctly represented as 2 cycles per millimeter. In the second one, the input signal was 3. It's going to be represented as 3, the input signal, since it is not greater than the Nyquist frequency of the system, which is 5 cycles per millimeter. In the third one, we have an input frequency of 4. It's going to be correctly represented as 4, because you can see it here. And the height is another thing. You don't have any problem with that. Then, if we now go into this right plane, the input signal here was 6. Is 6. But the Nyquist frequency is 5. There is no way this input frequency of 5 can be represented with this detector. It has gone beyond the Nyquist frequency. So because of that, there's going to be an aliasing here, and here, because the system, the input signal have exceeded, the signals that have been fed into the system have all exceeded, these 3 signals have all exceeded the Nyquist frequency of the system. So we are going to have the principle of aliasing here. We're going to have some of the signals will be aliased. Why? We will have aliasing has got to do with a reduced frequency of a particular system when it has entered a detector that has a lower frequency than it. So the frequency this one is going to display is sorry. The frequency this one is going to display is 4. It's going to display a frequency of 4. Why? Because I'm going to subtract the difference between 6 and the highest frequency. The Nyquist frequency of this one is 1. 6 minus 1 will be 1. So the difference between this and the frequency will be 1. So we're going to have a reduction of 1 in the frequency. So we are going to have 4. Mind us, the highest frequency that this detector can ever have is 5. It can never have anything greater than 5. So for this one that has an input signal of 7 cycles per millimeter, because the difference between this 7 and 5 is 2. So the signal, the measured signal that we're going to get is 3, because the difference between this one and the Nyquist frequency is 2. So 5 minus 2 is going to give us 3. Likewise here. So the more the difference in the Nyquist frequency and the frequency of the input signal, the more the aliasing. So we want to, for example, now we want to convert an analog image to a digital image. We have to make sure that the frequency of that analog image doesn't exceed the frequency of the detector we are using. If we do that, we are going to have aliasing, which is of course one of the what's it called, artifacts that we we come across in medical imaging. Oh, I think so. The noise is on the third a component of an image and quality. So very, 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 very important. Um, in a very, very basic form or very at its basic level, we just define those as irregular granular pattern. For example, if you have an image, if you look at some of images, some might be grainier than others. The ones that are grainier have much more noise. The signal to noise ratio is less. We have lesser SNR. So images that have lesser SNR have much more granular pattern. For the great image information, they make image a non-diagnostic. But they are present in all electronic systems. You can't do without the noise, but what we want to do is to reduce the noise as much as possible. Of course, noise originates from a number of sources. Right from the time the X-ray is interacting with the patient, so on, and need to have so much noise. If you look at a fluoroscopy, having so much electronic noise in a fluoroscopy, immediately the fluoroscopy as it comes in contact with the output and input phosphor, we have already introduced noise into it, and it passed through the focusing the all those electrodes, focusing electrode G1, G2, G3, we have so much more noise introduced, especially as a result of electronic noise. So and so many. So we want to look at some of these sources of noise. Oh, sorry. Oh. So these are some of the sources of image noise in a particular image we have acquired. The grain noise, the electronic noise, the structural noise, the anatomical noise, and the quantum noise. These all have one role to play in the noise that we have in a particular image. A grain noise. And this one has got to do mainly with, of course, not just film. For example, if you have whatever film, a film have, of course, silver halides, the silver bromide, and of course, also come and have also has what silver iodide also embedded. So the grain noise as a result of some differences in the grain in the silver halide, the silver bromide or silver iodide and grain. Some of them might not be well prepared during the production stage of the silver, the film. We might have some of these crystals that have not been perfectly made. And of course, because of the imperfection in the crystals, these imperfections are there to actually serve as latent sites for the image. They also introduce their own type of noise, like the latent image is as a result of some imperfections in those crystals. And those imperfections in the crystals are actually the site to which the development starts. So without those things, without those imperfections, we wouldn't have a film that will be developed during the development stage. So all those things are very, very necessary. And in as much as they are necessary, they also contribute in their own form of noise. So grain noise can actually come as a result of imperfection in crystal, maybe differences in crystal and structure, as the case may be. In the grain noise, we can also have it in the detector grains, like the cesium iodide crystal, and also have noise as a result of some imperfections you have in the silver, in the cesium iodide. So all these contribute grain noise. So grain noise is just as a result of the differences the in the well, this time around, the chemical structure of such a material, the chemical nature of the material as it applies to the crystals themselves. Then for electronic noise, not all electronic noise is this pointer. In all the in all the detectors that we encounter in videography, city, and so on and so forth, most of it just as a result of electrons. Electrons will be produced as one point or the other. Then some electrons that are produced are not because they are not produced because of interaction with the patient. Some are produced as a result of some other things. Some electrons that will be produced as a result of bombardment, maybe hitting of the maybe in a particular X-ray tube. You have one way or the other, gases have are leaked into the system, which is evidently true. That is why at times we have to replace our tubes, our X-ray tube, because as gases continue to enter into the tube, it degrades in the tube. The tube is no longer a vacuum. And of course, because of that, we're going to have as the electrons, as the X-rays continue to strike the anode, they're also striking some of the air molecules on their route, giving rise to some electrons. Those electrons have not come there as a result of interactions of the X-ray with the patient. So they are going to form a particular type of noise which wouldn't contribute to any image. So that's another form of noise. Then structural noise is somewhat similar to grain noise. That got to do with the structure of the detector. Some around, maybe we want to use a, um, maybe a cylindrical what's it called? Cesium iodide. In the early days, there's a particular, even for silver bromide. Today we use very, very flat silver bromide. But in earlier days, the silver bromide crystals weren't as flat as the ones we have these days. So because of some of these differences in structure of the crystals, we could have a form of noise introduced in the process of making the grains of the crystals we are using want to enhance their structures. So they are going to introduce their own form of noise. Then we want to look at the anatomical noise. This is an unwanted noise in the anatomy. For example, we want to look at the passage of maybe a particular maybe a fluoroscope. We want to look at the passage of a particular contrast in the body. Then we now have maybe we have we have maybe something the patient has just taken maybe a type of food that will impair the way these things um, will impair the anatomy at that particular site. We're going to introduce an anatomical noise. Of course, that is why during some imaging modality, maybe one is going through what's it called, maybe MRI, maybe MRI of essentially the pelvic region, or they will tell the patient, don't eat for this particular, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours before your MRI. You don't need to eat because if the patient eats, of course, the foot there will introduce some form of anatomical noise. So the quantum noise, of course, the X-rays, when we make use of X-rays, the X-rays used in causing a particular image is what constitutes mainly the contrast. The number of X-ray images used constitute the contrast. So the quantum noise is as a result of differences in the number of X-ray quanta that has been used to form the image. Of course, this gives a very, very strong description of the noise. The lesser the number of what's it called, the X-ray quanta one uses in forming a particular image, the more noise that will be introduced, because we now have so much deviations. So quantum noise has got to do with it's related to the amount of X-ray quanta, whatever we have used in forming the image. So these are some of the sources of image noise, which at some point in time might introduce one form of artifact or the other. So we have noise can be regular. Of course, we have looked at this. So we have look at a plain film. The one has this one has a low noise. This one has high noise. Of course, we have seen the presentation. This one has a beta SNR. This one has a lower SNR. And we could see three objects with differences in radiation intensity. This one has much more radiation intensity, more exposure than this. And because of that, this is a majorly captured in form of quantum noise. Look at the statistical deviation, the statistical fluctuation of this image here. Look at this in an oscilloscope. This is what we are going to see. There's so much statistical fluctuations here. And if you consider this one has lesser statistical fluctuations. This one much lesser, and then this one has the least statistical. So the amount of X-ray quanta that has been used to form a particular image seriously determines the noise level, which gives us a measure of the SNR. So we have in CT, we can increase noise, can decrease noise by increasing the MA, which is also possible, which is also what we do in conventional radiography, in fluoroscopy, but in all the modalities that use an X-ray. Noise can be described by changing filter during reconstruction. Of course, changing from one form of filter to the other can decrease or increase the noise. Then, in MRI, the main source of noise is the patient's body. And the main source of noise is the patient's body due to thermal motion. That can be increased by use of correct coil and blah blah blah. When using a large field of view, selecting a small thickness, as the case may be, we get well when we jump into MRI. So that's the end for now. There are still some other things we have to look at, which are very, very key, very, very important as far as image quality is concerned. Once we also look at QD, quantum detection efficiency, and QED, quantum efficiency, and all those stuff. We look at SNR ratio and how they contribute to the contrast of the body. We are going to look at ROC, receiver operator characteristics. That is going to look at in those. In that time, we are looking at the radiologist, the diagnostician display. Interpretation of the image. At times, the radiologist might miss some diagnosis. Maybe a particular abnormality was not there, and then it was represented as being there. These are actually things that happen, which we should look at during our next lecture. which I believe should come up on Friday. That one wouldn't take much of our time. And on that day, I would maybe, I don't know, we'll discuss more on our WhatsApp page because we must also have a test on that particular during our next lecture. The test has to cover all we have done from fluoroscopy, of mammography, and so on and so forth. We have to do a test on that before we move on to the next topic. Now, the next topic, I would like us to go and read those one up because there shouldn't be so much issues on them. Adjuncts of radiology and which other one, the conventional and digital radiography, other stuff. There shouldn't be so much problem. We might, if we have time, we'll come back to them. Maybe before the exam, if we have so much time, I think we'll come back to them. But if not, I think we might, and there isn't so much. There shouldn't be so much problem there. If we have time, we'll come back to them and then have a look at them. So our next topic, after the next topic, I think that has to be CT. We still have very, very important topics to cover. So let's have them covered because normally we don't have so many questions from these ones we are not going to move into. I have so many questions there. So we must quickly go through CT, MRI, and then ultrasound before the examination comes around. And we usually have so many questions from these modalities. By God's grace, as from next week, we might be having maybe lessons, maybe 3 times a week or so. If we can cover a particular topic in 2 days in a week, then based on the timetable, then we might have to schedule another one, just like we were doing before during the initial time we started. So at this point in time, I want to invite us for questions or contributions to what we have said so far. So I think it's almost 10. Now, do you have questions? Oh, past 10. Okay. Do you have questions? I haven't finished the topic though, but we still have questions to ask. We can ask. Sorry, I'm not going to sing it because the light has been interrupted. Power has been interrupted, sorry. Go back to the screen. We have questions to ask. Any questions? Okay. I want to presume no question.
Hello, sir.
Okay, I can hear you.
Sorry, me, I'm also on call. Most of the lecture I actually missed it. I was attending to a patient.
No problem. You can have it later. You can have the.
Well, from the one I saw, when you were talking about spatial resolution. Hello, sir.
Okay, partial. Okay, spatial resolution. Okay.
Yeah, the table you gave us only showed the limiting resolution in all the imaging modalities.
Okay.
But there are some questions that we saw recently that they asked about the resolution in terms of line pairs per millimeter in all the imaging modalities, not the limiting value. I don't know whether you get what I'm saying.
Okay, you mean?
Hello, sir.
Please, could you come up with the question again?
Yes, sir. There was a table on the limiting value resolution for all the imaging modalities. For instance, you said that 0.03
Okay.
millimeter
Okay.
and so on, up
Okay.
to nuclear medicine, that's about 7 millimeter or so.
Yeah. Line pairs per millimeter. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, there's a one of the questions we looked at recently. What they were comparing is the lines per millimeter for all the modalities.
Yeah. Yes.
You get what my
Yeah. There's
concern
a
now?
that's the line pair per millimeter. That's the special frequency.
Okay, that's the
That's
special frequency.
Yeah, that's the special frequency. Then from the special frequency, you can always get the, the smallest object it can resolve.
Oh,
And the special frequency is 1/2 times the smallest frequency, smallest object it can resolve. At the end of the day, you're going to get the smallest object. The bigger the smaller the object, the bigger the special frequency. And the smaller the object, the bigger the object, the smaller the spatial frequency. And the smaller the object, the bigger the spatial frequency. They are inversely, they have an inverse relationship. And maybe you can,
yeah.
we get
I
to,
understand what. Yeah, I understand now. It's the special frequency
yeah,
that is
the,
measured. Yes,
yes,
lines per millimeter.
yeah, the modulation transfer function MTF is always plotted against the line pace per millimeter, which is the spatial frequency. Or which is also the same thing as the cycles per millimeter. It could either be line per millimeter or cycles per millimeter. Cycles per millimeter is basically for for analog system, while line pairs per millimeter is basically mainly for a digital system.
Okay.
But
Okay.
next, if you are not too clear, in our next lesson, when
I understand now.
okay, okay,
It's clear now, sir.
okay.
The other thing I would have loved to understand, but you explained it when I left, was special domain, frequency domain. I didn't get the explanation.
Okay, it was from frequency domain that we entered the spatial frequency, all those stuff. I think when you get the video, and when we can always ask, we are always together. That's why I said if you have a question, you can always put it down on the group page, so that all other students, other colleagues will look at the questions and also gain from it. And people that have answers to it will also give lend their own voice to that. So during the next lecture, if we have our questions, let's always ask. From all centers, from all exams, from past, from our senior rate, who have actually written these exams, I think they are the best that can give us this thing on this. They have gone through the exams. They have been asked several questions. The more we interact with them, ask them the questions they ask, the better for us, the better prepared we will be. And then we can use this forum to add more flesh to whatever question, and then give as many views as possible to questions that um, are likely to come up. Any other thing? For those of us that maybe didn't get a good reception, the recordings are always available. So I want to wish us all the best. For those of us who are still on call, I want to wish us a wonderful call. Those of us who will be retiring to bed, to wish us a very um, sound night. Those of us who will be reading, I want to wish us very wonderful comprehension. Okay, I think we have to call it a day till our next lesson. On that day, on that next lesson, we must maybe probably also look at the past questions. I've been preparing past questions and then, as we used to do, send to our emails. We didn't do that for some obvious reason. We might prioritize the rate at which we flow. But I think at this point in time, before we go to our next lesson, which is CT. We need to finish up this aspect of radiography with questions. All of wish us them all the best. And bye from this end. Okay. Good night.
Right. Good night, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.